Can we begin? My name is Catherine Hall, and I'm the chair of the Centre for the Legacies of British Slavery at UCL, and I'm really happy to welcome all of you here this evening or lunchtime or whatever time it is in whichever country you're in, to celebrate the publication of the Jamaica Reader, edited by Diana Paton and Matthew Smith. And this is the first public collaboration between LBS and the Centre for Global History at Edinburgh. So it's particularly nice to have this occasion to greet this book and congratulate all the people who've been involved with it, the editors, the contributors. It's an extraordinary, rich collection of archival documents, political commentaries, poems, songs, short stories, all covering the period from the earliest days in Jamaica to now. And I have to say that I've spent a good deal of the afternoon reading some of it, and it's terrific. So I can personally recommend it to you. Well, we've got a great occasion to celebrate, and we have three speakers with us. Olive Senior, the Poet Laureate of Jamaica, so it's very, very special that Olive has been able to join us, I gather, from Montego Bay. And then we have Diana and Matt. And unfortunately, the editor who worked at Duke University Press on the book wasn't able to be here, but she wanted to make a contribution. So I'm just going to start by reading these remarks from Miriam Angras, who worked with Diana and Matt on the Jamaica Reader. In 1995, Duke University Press published the Peru Reader, History, Culture, Politics, co-edited by Orin Starn, Robin Kirk, and Carlos Ivan de Gregor. It sold extremely well, always very important to publishers, both to travelers and for classroom use. After the success of Peru, we decided to start a reader series focused on countries across Latin America. Our senior acquisitions editor, Valerie Mulholland, took up this challenge and founded the series with Orin Starn and Robin Kirk as series editors. And after her retirement, I took over the series. A central goal is to provide a deeper and more human view of a country or a people, moving beyond stereotypes and half-truths. These books are for use in undergraduate courses, but they also present complex perspectives on a country's past, culture, and politics in a way that's likely to be compelling and accessible to an intelligent general reader and traveler. Another goal of the series is to bring together many different genres in fruitful ways, gathering the best, most important, and engaging journalism, articles without jargon, essays, cartoons, poetry, excerpts from novels, political speeches, primary documents, and first-person testimonies by ordinary people whose voices often go unheard. We always include artwork and frequently include recipes, lyrics, excerpts from social media, and blog posts. In many cases, work is translated into English for the first time. We gradually expanded this series beyond Latin America, adding a World Reader series. For instance, we've published the South Africa Reader, the Bangladesh Reader, the Indonesia Reader, the Ghana Reader, and the Russia Reader in this expanded series, and plan a number of other readers around the world. I added a few readers that pushed the original boundaries of the series, the Alaska Native Reader and the Ocean Reader. As the volume editors explain in their introduction to the Jamaica Reader, there are many Jamaicas, a range which this book tries to capture. Poet Kai Miller says here that only a few tourists manage to find a true window on the beautifully ugly, violently magical, tragically wonderful thing that is the Caribbean. Here, that applies to the many faces of Jamaica. Matt and Diana put years of their life into this labor of love, a glorious effort to convey nuances and truths about a small nation that has had a vast and outsized impact on the world. So that's the very enthusiastic plaudit from Duke University Press. Well, now I'm terribly apologetic, but my iPad has just decided to die on me, and that had Olive's wonderful bio that she had sent to us. But fortunately, I'd already written something, having known about her work for so long and been thrilled to encounter her this evening. So she is, as I said at the beginning, the Poet Laureate of Jamaica for the next 3 years between 2021 and 2024. She's a prize-winning author with 18 volumes of poetry and fiction and non-fiction and children's literature. She's won numerous awards and honors, and her writing and editorial work and educational work has crossed the Caribbean, Canada, and far beyond. Olive, I know, has very special plans for her period as the Poet Laureate, dealing particularly with questions of the environment and land, so relevant to us all at the moment. And I just wanted to say personally that one of her poems, which is in the reader on Hurricane Gilbert, which is called Hurricane Story 1988, have particular meanings for me, as it will for many others whose family and friends were deeply affected by the hurricane. It's about her mum, and it's a beautiful piece of work. So let me first introduce Olive, who is going to speak, and then Matt and Diana will speak afterwards, and I'll introduce them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hall, and it's such a pleasure to meet you here. I feel I know you because I've heard so much about you and your work. So I am deeply, deeply honored to be invited to say a few words to launch this important book, the Jamaica Reader, History, Culture, Politics, published by Duke University Press, and to congratulate the distinguished editors, Diana Paton and Matthew Smith, one from Britain, one from Jamaica, as stated, both with the long-standing interest in the island's history. As they describe their work, and I quote, "We have pieced together a history of Jamaica through the voices of a wide range of the island's residents, both unknown and celebrated, along with many of the country's most important academic analysts. This anthology consciously blends familiar selections with lesser known texts to more accurately reflect Jamaica's realities. The excerpts selected by the editors are linked by an introduction to each of the 8 sections into which the book is divided, enhanced by carefully selected illustrations throughout. Consistent as it does of short pieces, a reader fits very well into our notion of shortened attention spans, especially in this time of COVID. We can open this book anywhere and sample. To make it easier, the editors have provided a heading and preface contextualizing each selection. To introduce a Jamaica Reader in this way is not to trivialize it. Rather, I want to assure that its hefty 500+ pages should not be seen as daunting, but as an inviting space that you can enter, read a little, rest if you must. I guarantee that you will soon wake up and turn the pages again to find other riches that will bring serious contemplation as well as laughter. For unlike the conventional history book, the accent here, I would say, is on extracting story from history. These nuggets contain the power of stories to lead us on and into a way of reading by listening to the voices that resonates with us when the whole dry as dust record might not. We become more conscious of lived realities when we hear a domestic worker talking about her life in employment, a farm worker of the selection requirement of having hands tough enough to be chosen to cut cane, of the hopefulness of an emigrant of the Windrush generation, of truth-telling from the dock worker who was there at the summoning of Bustamante and St. William Grant to speak on their behalf in the strikes of 1938, of Lady Saw explaining slackness, Bujabanton's devastating takedown of the deportee, or P.J. Patterson's devastating takedown of the visiting British Prime Minister. More than anything, the reader demonstrates how singular stories can embody and amplify the whole. Here are not simply the words and insights of the august, the privileged, and the lettered, who are often seen as the exclusive bearers of what we might call history. Here are the rest of us, the poets, the singers, the patois speakers, the marginalized and the oppressed, the ones with the carefully modulated tones, as well as the speaky-spokey. With these short and imposing nuggets inserted into the wider historical narratives, we end up with a coming together that enables us to better understand a multifaceted and complex society. The editors in their introduction dismissed the two Jamaicas idea for something far richer, and I quote, "To view Jamaica as two distinct halves glosses over the complex processes by which a place and its people were formed. There are, in fact, many Jamaicas between these extremes, and they are not attempting to reconcile these alternate visions. Instead, they explain, and I quote, we have tried to illustrate the range of life experiences, the historical and cultural influences, and the creativity of people in Jamaica. Sections enable readers to understand change and development over Jamaica's history in people's work lives, political engagement, and cultural production, among other themes. These counterpoints to the official narratives can embody or amplify the whole. Presenting information in this fashion, where we can savor each separate entry, can bring a kind of clarity and awareness that leaves traces on our imaginations and force us to sit up and take notice in ways we might not when burdened with forging through a conventional history book. These nuggets, as I might call them, can arouse in our consciousness a picture or image that affords different insights, even of stories we think we know well. And I'll just share a few of these nuggets that reoriented my own thinking. For example, that the words jerked pork were already in use by the census of 1607. Or Sidney Mintz, observant of the Jamaican cultivation and marketing system established by the enslaved, that the preferred plants for market and cuisine were already established by 1800. So when we go to the market today, we are engaging not just in transactions, but in patterns established hundreds of years ago. And some that I'm not sure he mentions, but say some such as cassava bami, which go back thousands of years to the indigenous inhabitants. And this is what enables us to see ourselves as not on the sidelines, but as part of historical processes. Other nuggets that really made me sit up and think, the real nature and landscape of plantation society comes home when we're told that for every one free person, there were 9 enslaved. Or Shades of Dancehall, Hans Sloane remarking in the 18th century that the slave songs were all bawdy. And relevant to the time of COVID, a remark by a missionary during the cholera epidemic of the 1850s that survivors either turned to religion or became even more wicked and vile. And I leave that to people to decide about the contemporary situation. So these are tropes and topics swirling around and re-emerging for wonder or debate. Enslavement, colonization, racial or gender-based injustices, official strictures or laws can sometimes be balanced out by the feisted Jamaicans' highly developed sense of dissing, expressed in words, action, or body language. In quote, showing skin teeth, described in an article on tourism workers as, I quote, a patois phrase that implies a false smile that hides frustration, hostility, or anger. The Jamaica Reader enables past and present to intertwine, and how prophetic we must now find Louise Bennett's famous poem, Colonization in Reverse, about the West Indian immigrants to Britain, who will turn history upside down. As we enter this new age of the Windrush scandal, debates on empire, genocide, enslavement, and reparations, to name a few. The Jamaica Reader, with its extensive notes, suggestions for further reading, and index, will satisfy the academic or student. But this is a book that should be read by anyone who has some curiosity about our past and the complex relationships that make up the vibrant Jamaica of the present, suffused as it is, and I quote, with beauty and poverty, passion and politics. The editors modestly state that, I quote, a volume such as this cannot possibly be comprehensive. Nevertheless, we hope the reader will serve as a guide for those new to Jamaica, whether as tourist, visitor, or student, and will also provide food for thought for those who already know the country well. The Jamaica Reader certainly did this for me. I tried hard to think of omissions, and they are no doubt there. But on first reading, there are no disappointments. I can only marvel at the range of topics and the way it chronicles our changing preoccupations over time, down to the modern era, where skin bleaching, homophobia, or hurricanes share space. I hope the Jamaica Reader finds its way to our policymakers too, so that decisions will be taken with a stronger sense of seeing our present condition, not simply as arising from the moment. Close attention will show that the roots of all our preoccupations and concerns are deeply entrenched in our history and psyches, including today's persistent issues. To name just one, the issue of squatting and the passionate desire for a little piece of land to call one's own at home. In closing, I wish to congratulate again everyone involved in this production and to thank especially Professors Paton and Smith for giving us a gift, this gift, their sensitive exploration of a complex society. Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Well, that was a wonderful way to celebrate this volume. Thank you so much, Olive Senior. I'd now like to ask first Professor Diana Paton and then Professor Matthew Smith to tell us some more about the volume. Diana Paton is, of course, a well-known historian of the Caribbean. Her books, particularly No Bond But the Law and the Cultural Politics of Obeah, have been tremendously important. Her current work on motherhood promises us all so much. And she's the William Robertson Chair of History in the University of Edinburgh. So couldn't think of a better person to have done this collection. And over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Catherine, for chairing and for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much, Olive, for your really wonderful words on the book. Thanks also, Rachel, for organizing everything so brilliantly and smoothly today. And I also want to thank everybody who has made the effort to be here with us tonight or today, depending on the time zone, despite what I know is the endless Zoom fatigue that we are all struggling with so many months into this pandemic. I want to offer some more thanks. I want to thank everybody whose work helped us make this book. And most importantly, the writers and artists whose words and images are included in it. And it's great to scan down the list of people who are here and to see many people whose words we have included in the screen to the right, although I can't see your faces. But I also want to thank the people who read the book in draft, the people who made suggestions about what we should include, the many people at Duke University Press who worked on the book, Miriam Angres most of all, but also the series of interns who helped with the book, all the people involved in marketing and production. I want to thank the staff at all the libraries that we visited to check out potential sources, my department at Edinburgh University and before that at Newcastle, and the many people who helped us with tasks like checking permissions, with proofreading and with clarifications and discussions about specific points in Jamaican history. Most of all, I want to thank my co-editor, Matthew Smith. Working with Matt over the last 7 years has been a really wonderful collaborative experience. And I feel so lucky that you agreed to take this on, Matt. It's a cliche that books are made by many people beyond those that are named on the cover, but I think in this case it's especially true. The reader, as Olive indicated, includes I think more than 100 extracts from other people's words and images, and it literally could not exist without those authors and those artists. I think the earliest pieces that we included are images of Taino carved wooden religious objects from the 14th century that are now held in the National Gallery of Jamaica. And the most recent piece, I think, is former Jamaican Prime Minister P.J. Patterson's open letter calling for reparations addressed to David Cameron in the context of Cameron's visit to Jamaica in 2015. And in between, we tried to represent the depth and breadth of writing on Jamaica in a way that would be engaging and accessible both to readers coming to Jamaica with little knowledge of the country, but also to readers who know Jamaica well from their own personal experience or their scholarship. When Valerie Milholland at Duke University Press, who launched this series and who sadly is no longer with us, first asked me if I might be interested in editing a Jamaica Reader as part of her Latin America Reader series. The other volumes in the series were all about places with populations many, many times the size of the population of Jamaica. And Valerie thought, she said, that there would be enough material to do a Jamaica Reader, but she wasn't completely sure and she wanted to check that. I assured her that there definitely would be plenty to include. And in fact, in editing the reader, we had to go back to Duke Press more than once to ask for additional pages. And in the end, we did have to cut also quite a few pieces that we had wanted to include and to abridge many others in order to stay just about within the limit of 500 pages that we were allotted. Despite those limits, we were able to include, I think, a lot of really wonderful material. I was going to share my screen and show you the detailed table of contents, but I think for reasons of time, I won't do that. But if you do want to see and you haven't been able to get a copy of the book, you can go to the Amazon website, the US version, and use the look inside version of feature, and that you can see there the full table of contents with all the more than 100 extracts. Although I urge you to buy the book if you're going to buy it from your local bookshop and not from Amazon.com. I want to just though say a little bit about the structure of the book and then finish by drawing attention to a particular one particular extract. So it's organized chronologically. Largely we have 7 chronological sections, the first 3 taking the story up to the end of slavery in the 1830s, then a 4th one that runs from the 1830s to the First World War, 3 more that deal with the rest of the 20th century and the 21st century, and then finally a chapter on the Jamaican diaspora. But I want to finish by drawing attention to one specific extract. And when Matt and I talked about doing this, it was very, very hard to choose. But it's from the chapter that we called Enlightenment Slavery, which deals with the period from roughly the 1770s to 1838. And that's a period when many of those who owned the largest numbers of human beings saw themselves, understood themselves as cultured men of the Enlightenment. It's also the high point of Jamaican slavery. So we used this apparently contradictory title to draw attention to those deep connections between Enlightenment values of progress and rationality on the one hand, and the expansion of slavery on the other. So the extract I want to focus on briefly is the first one that we use in that section. It's from Kamal Brathwaite's groundbreaking book, The Development of Creole Society in Jamaica, 1770 to 1820, which was first published in 1971. And that book is still a really foundational study of Jamaica in this crucial period. So we extracted from the conclusion to Brathwaite's book, where he connects the history that he is writing about the period he's writing about to Jamaica's current situation as a newly independent nation. So I'm just going to read a little bit of that extract. Brathwaite says, "To see Jamaica, or the West Indies generally, as a slave society is as much a falsification of reality as the seeing of the island as a naval station or an enormous sugar factory. Here, in Jamaica, fixed within the dehumanizing institution of slavery, were 2 cultures of people, having to adapt themselves to a new environment and to each other. The friction created by this confrontation was cruel, but it was also creative. The white plantations and social institutions described in this study reflect one aspect of this. The slaves' adaptation of their African culture to a new world reflects another. The failure of Jamaican society was that it did not recognize these elements of its own creativity." And Brathwaite then goes on to describe how during slavery there emerged what he calls an Afro-Creole folk or little tradition, which was rejected by the Euro-Creole elite, who continued to derive their normative values and their reference points from British society. And then Brathwaite reflects on the current moment, his current moment in Jamaica, which is the moment of the immediate aftermath of independence, which came in 1962. So he must have been writing in the late 1960s. He says, "With political power now in the hands of the Black majority of the population, it remains to be seen whether the process of creolization will be resumed in such a way that the little, quotes, tradition of the ex-slaves will be able to achieve the kind of articulation, centrality, prestige, and influence, assuming that it is not by now too debased, that will provide a basis for creative reconstruction. Such a base, evolving its own residential great tradition, could well support the development of a new wholeness, a difficult but possible Creole authenticity." And it seems to me that the 50 years that have passed since Brathwaite published those words, that in those 50 years, in some ways, this little tradition of Jamaican vernacular culture has incontestably triumphed. And yet in other ways, there continues to be an ongoing and still unresolved struggle over whether this little tradition will be able to achieve the kind of prestige that Brathwaite argued it deserved. Indeed, I think I've drew attention to that quote, particularly because I think in some ways much of the rest of the book, certainly the book the part of the book devoted to the later 20th century and the 21st century is devoted to aspects of these struggles over culture, class, and race in Jamaica, about what counts as that great tradition. So I think in that sense, it's a fitting piece to choose to represent the reader as a whole. And with that, I'm going to turn over to my co-editor, Matt Smith.
Thank you so much, Diana. Let me just say, oh, wonderful to pick up the Brathwaite. It was one of the first pieces I reread, and it's so pertinent. So it's really such a pleasure for me to be able to introduce Matt, because we, of course, are absolutely delighted to have him now in London as the director, the new director of the centre. And I know that's your loss in Jamaica, but what we all hope is that this is the inauguration of a much closer relationship between Britain, can I say between Britain and the Caribbean? That's really pushing it. Between our centre and all those of you in Jamaica. And we really look forward to that and know that Matt will be the perfect person to help us make that happen. So, of course, his writings are well known on both Haiti and Jamaica: Liberty, Fraternity, Exile, Haiti and Jamaica after independence, and Red and Black in Haiti. And now leading our project in London, and it's exciting, we hope, new phase which we're entering with our work. So over to you, Matt. And I should say, apologies, I should have said this at the beginning. There will be a bit of time for questions and comments at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you, Olive, for the honor of having you launch the book for us. It really, really is such a tremendous honor, Olive, and I'm really touched that you accepted our invitation, and even more to have heard your words, which, you know, you got what we were trying to do. And as Diana mentioned in her comments just now, this has been a long process for us. It's been 7 years. When you said it just now, Di, I couldn't believe it. 7 years that we've been working on it. And it needed that 7 years, I would say. It needed that 7 years because what we were attempting to do with this project is to make some sense of what sometimes feels ungraspable. That is, how do we explain Jamaica? How do we explain Jamaica in a way that makes it available to people who don't know Jamaica as well as to people who know Jamaica, Jamaicans, people who have studied Jamaica. And we figured very early on in the process that a lot of that work has been done by people who have spent time considering and thinking about Jamaica and living through the very contradictions and the paradoxes, things that we see on the surface of what Jamaica might seem on the outset, what the history might seem to reveal, but also looking beyond that to try and shed a light to it, shed a light on what really has made society, politics, history of Jamaica. And this is what we set out to do. And once we had that idea, actually executing it was both a fun process and also a great challenge. It was a challenge because it meant that we had to look at things that we assumed we might have known, things that we might have taken for granted about the stories of Jamaica, and to move beyond those assumptions to really kind of quiz further why it is that we see Jamaica in that way. Things such as, how did Jamaica become named Jamaica, which we spent a bit of time working through. How did the landscape change? What did plantation slavery really mean in not just the landscape and the topography and the economy of the island, but also the longer legacies, the things that Di just pointed to in her comment on Brathwaite's extract. The fun part of it was to actually dig in and to get the readings and to work on putting our thinking caps on and to try and find readings that explain Jamaica, readings that give us that insight into what the country is, into what it might have been seen as at a particular point in time, and in some senses into what it has become. I used as a sort of motivating mantra for us as we worked on it that we're trying to cover Jamaica from Taino to Tivoli. And in some senses, that's a span that we look at. But there's a lot in between. And the great feat that we had to set for ourselves was, how do you look at that? What do you include? What do you leave out? And how do you make these decisions, these choices of the extracts that you put in a way that makes sense to someone who is less familiar with it? And that's where the skills of editing come in to a certain extent. And for that, I will speak a little bit more about that process, but also the skills of good collaboration and partnership. And in you, Dai, I had a tremendous partner and collaborator, someone I learned a tremendous amount from. It was a challenge for me in some ways, because for those of you who know Diana Paton, she is a rigorous expert, scholar, and historian who takes nothing for granted and looks very deeply at all of the sources before she forms and develops her argument. And that was something I learned a tremendous amount from, that has carried over into my writing and into my own approach to the history. And also the work of the people that we selected. We sat down, we assembled a great list, a sort of master list. It's almost like a mixtape of all the great writings on Jamaica that we'd want. And then we spent the time reading it, developing from those readings the story that we'd want to tell in the individual sections of the book. Once we did that, we then had to think about the arrangement of it. Diana mentioned just the Brathwaite piece, how we chose the section from that sort of seminal book that Kamau Brathwaite wrote, to make sure that that piece really worked in the section that it appears in. Similarly, we had to find ways of editing other pieces, or sometimes juxtaposing pieces together. One example of that I will highlight is the famous 1976 speech that Michael Manley gave, that's often been labeled as the "We're Not for Sale" speech at the PNP conference just before the election of 1976. That's followed immediately by the postscript to George Beckford's Small Garden Bitter Wheat, which is a critique of that period. Our job as editors was to highlight these two moments in Jamaica's political history, pivotal moments in Jamaica's political history, and to make sure that the reader is able to understand a little bit about the stakes that were at play in that period. And that is one of the things that we spent time on. That was one of the things that challenged us to develop new craft and new skills in editing, and new skills in also developing a way of assembling good pieces together. There's another piece that I would like to also highlight, which I think speaks to some of the things that we were fascinated by in the project. We had to challenge ourselves again to not be caught up in too many historiographical debates. We're both historians, but this is not a book that we're prepared solely for historians. So we had to make sure that we gave the sort of kernel of historiographical debates and concerns around questions of empire, colonialism, race, gender, homophobia, all of these issues that have been threads throughout Jamaica's history, and to do so in a way that covers the island. So as much as we're trying to point to very dominant themes, we also don't want it to be themes that seem to be only Kingston-centered. So we made a lot of effort at making sure that we had some elements that move beyond it. And I want to just highlight two other readings here that I think point to some of this. And it also points to change over time in the island of Jamaica. And interestingly, they're both pieces written by two Esthers. Esther Figueroa, the author of the wonderful novel Limbo, and Esther Chapman, who was a Briton who was in Jamaica in the 1930s, started a West Indian Literature Journal, the Journal of West Indian Literature, sorry. And we have a piece from her 1950s book, Pleasure Island. And I'm just going to read a small section of it and to pay attention to how she describes Jamaica and how she represents Jamaica at this point in time. The whole island is tourist material, for everywhere there is beauty. Everywhere the sun shines, everywhere there is richness of scenery and softness of air. The breezes blow by day and night to temper the hot sun. but that sun is grateful indeed to skins roughened by the winds of the Northlands. Now, this was written in an attempt to encourage tourist visitors to the island in the 1950s. Listen to how Esther Figueroa, in her novel Limbo, which I recommend to everybody, discusses or describes a house in St. Anne about 50 years or so after Esther Chapman wrote Pleasure Island. They drive into what unmistakably had once been a thriving community, homes with yards and fertile soil to grow food, with delicate details of fretting or carefully placed porches and verandas that reveal the work of skilled carpenters and builders. But they have been abandoned for decades, windows shattered, paint peeling, walls fractured, roofs leaking. And you see the contrast there of the environmental costs of some of the things that were seen as hopes and dreams at an early period in Jamaica's history. This is the sort of approach that we took. We were gifted by having a rather large trove of material to draw from. And I thank here all the authors who are in the book. I thank them and the family members of some of the authors who contacted us or gave permission for their relatives' work to be included in the book. I thank the artists who were part of the project, whose work is featured in the book. I must also thank all the research assistants who worked with us on the book in Newcastle, in Edinburgh, and also in Kingston. And very special thanks to everybody, students at the UWI who worked with me on the project, helping with some of the transcriptions, helping with some of the suggestions for some of the pieces, and also being just general good feedback. I thank my colleagues at the UWI Department of History and Archaeology, and a very special thanks to the ladies who are the administrative staff at the Department of History and Archaeology for all of their support. They are collectively known as the ladies, and I know some of them are with us here this evening, this afternoon. Rudy Ann, Claudine, and Camilla, thank you very much for your support. And in the very last big push that Diana and I worked on with the book, it happened when I was head of the department, and they were very, very patient and gave us a lot of space to work in the office. And I hope that that the rewards are something that you find satisfactory for that support. We thank the people from Duke University Press, all of the persons that Diana mentioned, from Miriam Angres to all the interns to all of the other staff that helped with the editing, the anonymous readers of the manuscript. It went through 2 or 3 very big and very careful edits by Duke's readers, peer reviewers, and they gave us some very, very important comments, and I thank them for their time. And I thank all of the other support staff, people who I may not be remembering now, but who have all been very important in us sort of shaping and making this reader and this event today, including Catherine Hall, who's our chair, and I'm very delighted for that, and Rachel Lang, also from the center, our administrator and researcher, for all the technical work. My last bit of thanks, and it's a big one, is actually to the people who made this cover possible. This cover would not be the outstanding cover it is if it were not for the support we got from Jet, the artist who made the mural, Mariana, who worked on the project Paint Jamaica, the community at Fleet Street, which is where this mural was, Kwame Miller, the photographer and a friend of mine who took the photograph, and especially to Charmaine, KJ, and Chin, our stars on the cover of the book, who were so genial and so willing to support this effort in making sure that we found a way of representing all of the paradoxes and contradictions, the victories, triumphs, humor, and pride that makes up Jamaica and its history, and put it in a way that invites people to explore in this cover. We want you to explore the book. We want you to explore the authors in the book. A good reader makes you want to read more that's in it. And we hope that that is something that you will do. For everybody out there tuning in and everybody who's given us support, give thanks.
Many thanks to you, Matt, for all the work. I mean, between you, you've given us such a sense of how much work was involved in producing this wonderful reader. And of course, most of all, the extraordinarily rich material that you've been able to draw on, which speaks volumes about Jamaica, literally.